Hello, everybody, and welcome to our panel conversation. I think we are wrapping up what has been an amazing 19 or 20-hour day that started at 2 a.m. 2 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, was 3 p.m. in Sydney, Australia. And we're really incredibly excited to have a conversation about connecting innovators to make the better normal happen as we're thinking about returning to work or what the future of work will look like. I'm joined today by three amazing panelists, and this is really meant to be a conversation. So I will give you a brief background on their bios, just really to set the stage, but then we'll ultimately have a conversation. If anyone has comments or questions and wants to pose them in chat, please feel free to do that. We will try to integrate those into the conversation. We want you all to feel like you're part of this experience with us. So first, in alphabetical order, I will introduce Naomi Berlin, who is the Strategic Sales Director and Launch Director for CIC's growing North American portfolio. In these positions, she helps foster an environment where thousands of innovators and entrepreneurs can launch new ventures quickly and efficiently, giving them a resource-rich environment in which to succeed. Prior to joining CIC, Naomi focused her professional life in communications and government, including work in media relations at Dukas PR and a role in government with the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, and was a political fundraiser with the Alex Sink for Governor campaign in her home state of Florida. Naomi holds a BA from Tufts University in International Relations, and I was sharing with her, my son will be a fellow jumbo in the next couple weeks. And an MPA from NYU's Wagner School of Public Service. She's a new mom and lives with her family in Boston. So welcome, Naomi.
Thank you, Tracy. So happy to be here.
You're welcome. Next is Timur. T is a creative director and social entrepreneur who has committed his life to creating content, developing brand experiences, and having conversations that later become tipping points. We're going to hold you to that, T. Timur. He leveraged his influence both as an ongoing proof of concept and as a tool to build global relationships. Timur is passionate about igniting the fire inside individuals from different disciplines and industries whose cross-section is the digital world by giving them the tools to brand themselves and build their own futures. He's currently the creative director for Timur Media. He also has a role at Doer House, which is a community of like-minded people with creative souls. Doer House is their home away from home and champions Black culture and facilitates an environment that encourages fun, collaboration, and growth. He's a graduate of Harris Stowe State University. And finally, Pamela Puchalski is a policy, community, and economic development expert with extensive U.S. and international experience in operations and management, strategic planning, program design and implementation, fundraising, and partnerships. Pamela is a founder and currently the VP at the Global Innovation District Institute. Previously, she launched 100 Resilient Cities for the Rockefeller Foundation, Brookings Global Cities Initiative, and LSC Cities, as well as AIA Center for Architecture. She has an undergraduate degree from the University of Maryland College Park and has an MS in Urban Planning from Columbia University. I realized that I didn't tell you anything about myself.
No.
Which is, I will give you just the brief intro, which is I'm Tracy Brala, the Executive Director of Venture Cafe Philadelphia, which has been around now for about 18 months. I am also the Vice President of Ecosystem Development for the University City Science Center, which is a 55-year-old nonprofit in Philadelphia. We are located in the heart of the U City Square, which is part of the University City Innovation District, so part of Philadelphia's Innovation District, and very proud of that. I've spent my career all around innovation. A good portion of it was really in corporate America, but I also had a startup marketing and strategy consulting business, have an undergraduate degree from Villanova University and an MBA from the Wharton School. So now that we have all those intros by us and a little bit of context, let's start talking about our topic at hand. Prior to the COVID pandemic, it was cited that about 25% of folks were working remotely, which meant 75% of folks were really in an office environment. At the height of the pandemic in April, and these are US statistics, about 62% of folks were working from home. So a really pretty significant shift. How do you think we can look at corporate offices and co-working spaces and innovation campuses? What are they going to look like as we move forward towards the end of 2020 and into the future?
I'm happy to start, Tracy.
Perfect.
Thanks for those introductions. So, I think that, first of all, none of us have been through this before. There is no roadmap for navigating our way through a pandemic. So what this is going to look like, I don't know. But we have learned a lot over the last few months of living this. And the answer to sort of how we think about our workspaces is actually pretty freeing, I think, because you have a choice. It's not just about working from home or going to an office. It can be both. And so what I think we need to think about is how do we then serve the people, our work population, to make sure that they can thrive both in that digital experience and in the in-person dimension. So there's like a simultaneous approach that has to happen, but it's not one or the other. And so with that, I think that it allows us to support so many different people with different background experiences, because we don't have to just be home or go to work. It can be both. And I think that these work environments have to be able to accommodate that. I mean, we can go into details into how.
Yeah, man. So first and foremost, as my first opportunity to speak, Tracy, thank you so much for that amazing introduction. And I'm also honored to be on a panel, with yourself, Naomi, as well as you, Pamela. So again, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak and to share my space and my viewpoint. But to attack this question, I think it's interesting. We had this conversation, a few friends of mine and I, and we said, early, when people started working from home, it became this thing done, right? So a lot of people are now challenged, right? Because a lot of these places where you were forced to be in the office, now you're able to do these things in the comfort of your home, right? So I think it's more of you're going to start seeing a shift for the human connection start becoming more relatively important, right, than it ever has been, because the morale of being at home and not having the enthusiasm of your teammates to get projects done not only is going to change the way that work is completed, but it's going to change the effectiveness of the work, right? And I think that we're going to become the world and the workforce is going to become more transactional than it does relational, which to me will have an effect, kind of in a negative sense, if everyone is kind of becoming now so remote, right? So you have organizations like WeWork who thrive off of the co-workspace model that are now going to be suffering from it because people are either, scared of the pandemic, and don't know what steps that are being taken to kind of allow people to remain safe. So I think that we're in this space as a creative myself. I'm like in this creative sabbatical right now where like I'm enjoying the time away, but like I also need the human connection so that like I'm not in my own head creating, concepts or solutions that are team based, right? Versus like human based. So again, I think that we're in a very interesting space. But I do believe that the power of the human connection is extremely important. So we're going to have to take those parameters to ensure, that we're able to navigate and still be, competitive in all of our different business ventures.
Thank you. Helpful. Timor, Naomi, Tracy, thank you. I'm going to build off of something you both said, which is, this challenging the question that there is a normal, that there's one size fits all, I think is the real shift that's happening, that has implications for equity and who participates, who joins the team. You said nomad, Timur. I've been on the road for 3+ months with my 1-year-old and still working. And so it's not even just home work, it's work. It has these multi-centers, and so do where we as team members plug into. I think there's a real big question that's coming up in the US and maybe other regions. In the chat, maybe we can get something going about kind of leveling the playing field. So it's not just those that have access to transportation or, whatever some of those barriers are that have prevented a more inclusive workforce, I think is a big question, at least in the US. And with that, I've heard interesting things coming out of some of the Nordics around, with less transport on the road. What are the implications, not just for public transportation and how we finance that, but also the environment in terms of, no more rush hours or LAs, or I don't know, Naomi, you're in Boston, Tracy, Philly, Timur, forgive me, I didn't catch where you were dialing in from. Where from?
St. Louis.
St. Louis, yeah, that's right. Sorry. So, it's just commuting, and everything has been flipped on its head, and there's an opportunity here to kind of retool some things that haven't been working.
I love this idea of people and human connection as it relates to spaces. And so what are the things that you think are critical as we're designing spaces going forward that are helpful in us thinking about that human connection?
I'll jump in just to kind of build and go a little bit deeper. So with the Global Institute on Innovation Districts, we've launched a network, and we're connecting with innovation districts specifically in this kind of short-term frame to look at COVID impacts. And of course, one of the topics that is so critical to innovation is this kind of creative collision, collaborative innovation, people bumping into each other. And if they're not seeing, maybe there's a small meeting of different minds, horizontals, verticals coming together, but then that can be short because then you run into someone in the lobby or the elevator, and that's just not happening. And that's the people place, one of the people place dimensions, getting a coffee, meeting, sitting down 15 minutes, just a little bit of that face-to-face interaction that we don't see. And so again, there's some of the kind of new ideas that are coming out is, again, building on this. It's not one way that, everyone's going to return to work, or everyone's going to have Monday, Wednesday, Friday in the office, or every other week in the office, whatever the variety is. It's kind of, the pot. The pot is stirring and the stew is thickening in terms of what are new opportunities. And the last point I'll make on that is kind of hybrid, connecting virtual and in person, and really experimenting with that. That's a lot of the insights, and I can give some examples, but I'll just pause there and see what Naomi and Timur have to say.
Yeah, Pamela, I mean, that's it. So CIC is an innovation center, right? And the whole point is these magical collisions that happen when you're going and getting a coffee and you just bump into somebody who's also getting a coffee and you start a conversation and you don't know where that goes. Well, obviously those surreptitious interactions don't happen anymore. All of our interactions, Timur, it's sort of what you were saying, it's deliberate, right? People are going stir crazy at home. So we need to I've been thinking about it as like escaping to work. But even so, for those of us with kids as well, it feels especially true. But the idea of, but when you're deliberately going to work, you're seeking that connection. So it is more deliberate, less spontaneous, but how do you support that hybrid model? And I do think there is something very powerful actually in that virtual model too, that I think you can create these surreptitious feelings as well. In a way, having something that is virtual, it's like what's happening, and we see this with Venture Cafe, right? That the virtual replacements attendance is actually higher than ever before. We're lowering the barrier to entry. We're making high level discussions more accessible than ever before. Our gatherings are growing in attendance. So I think that there's ways that you can do even the virtual very personally, while still then doing the in-person also really personally and deliberately. And I would love to talk through some of the examples that you referenced, Pamela, and talk about some of the stuff that we're doing too.
And Tracy, if you could just repeat your question for me, I got so lost in Naomi and Pamela's answers. I'm missing the question.
It was really this idea about the human connection. So building on what you were saying. So as we go back to a new normal, how do we make sure that we're fostering that human connection? If in fact it's not place-based, what does that look like too?
Okay, I got you. So I think that, Naomi and Pamela have given, an amazing example of just how you kind of be, again, now intentional, right? But I'll go a different direction of saying, physically, right, when we do, because we're going to get to a place where we're going to be back physically, involved and around people. That looks extremely different than it ever has, of course, right? That's the reality, the harsh reality of it. You wish you could just go back to like no mask and normal and knowing who somebody is up underneath the mask, right? But I think now more than ever, physically having a brick and mortar space myself here in St. Louis, I've watched, we literally opened February 1st. We opened our doors February 1st. And obviously the world knows what happened. A month, right? 4 weeks later, we had to close our doors. And we had to sustain within the time from March to July, really, to really say like, at least we have an understanding of where we may be going. And now, as we've opened our doors to do more physical activations, we're seeing people, nervous to step out of the home into this space. And it's like, we're doing our measures, we're doing temperature checks, and we're doing masks, and we're doing these things. But now we're forced to be able to like activate a new style of communication, right? So I think that as many negatives that have come from COVID, there has been so many positives as well. Right, because I've challenged myself in the months that we were dormant away from human connection to be intentional using social media platforms like Instagram, right? And saying, hey, this is who I am, this is what I'm doing, and this is where I feel like our synergy could be. It's giving me a lot more time to be, kind of pay attention to where synergy lies. And I think now, as we step back into this physical place, I genuinely believe that we're going to be more sustainable. I believe that we're going to be more impactful, and I believe that we're going to be more, heavily like directed to this human connection because we've missed it for so long. So now we had that one thing taken away from us that we really took for granted. That now when we see people, we're going to be very, very, very intentional on saying, hey, let's make this moment count. Right. So I'm extremely excited about, this new normal.
I love that idea. I love the idea of potentially a better normal. So it's really, taking kind of what was. I completely agree with you. I do a weekly newsletter every week, and I was talking a lot about in the beginning, while there was loss, there was also this opportunity to really find a renewed sense of purpose and a renewed sense of appreciation for things that we took for granted, things that, trees that you saw every day that you no longer, you just walked past and didn't think about. And then now you were looking at the birds that were, having their babies inside of them and seeing the buds that were emerging and things that we would not have appreciated really fully in the past. I think that really is a neat segue into how do we actually work better together from home? So we talked a little bit about what it could look like, kind of the masked environment, socially distanced kind of in the office, and that might provide a level of comfort. But how do we, if in fact there is this hybrid model, or if there's some of us who never return to a physical work environment, how do we actually set ourselves up to be fulfilled from a human satisfaction standpoint if we are actually focused on working from home?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at this. Being, again, I like to clarify, like I am a creative person, right? I have a creative spirit, right? So if I have the opportunity to do something that's new and, challenging, right, or stimulating, But I think that a positive, I'm speaking from a total positive light of it. But it's forced people to have all of these creative exteriors to do, right? So people are at home being the most creative they've ever been, making blankets, cooking, and doing all these different crafts now. I think that I've been more impactful online than I have offline over the last 2 years, over the last 3 or 4 months now. Because now I'm sitting at home and I'm saying like, yeah, I was used to doing my normal day to day, but I had gotten such in a habit, right, that I was just kind of going through the motions of some of these things. I love what I do, but motion had just become a part of the habit. Now that habit has now been struck and it's like, okay, wait, what's going on? I have a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, right, at home. And now I'm looking around and, the queen is like, babe, I'm going in today or I'm doing this and I just need a break. And, so you're having to figure out these things. But now I think it gets better because now I feel like people are more purposefully chasing what they're having a passion for. So I think that now that you haven't been forced by the societal, norm, you're now saying, hey, look, this is a better opportunity for us to work together because now we can use things like Zoom and Google Hangouts and Google Meets and platforms like we're using now to connect with people globally. Right. And now the people who you thought were kind of, you don't even really think about video chat as much. But now you have the opportunity. You don't know where these viewers are from across the world. Right. This has been going for 24 hours damn near. Right. So now you have an opportunity. I'm able to now share my voice with someone who probably wouldn't have found my Instagram page.
Yeah, Timur, I'm so, I can relate to so much what you're saying. And it's like, I love the positivity and the enthusiasm. It's great. I need that also because it's, 8 p.m., 8:30 our time. And this is awesome. It's great.
I'm trying to keep up.
And I don't know what your experience was like when we sort of first shifted and everything started from home, but I feel like the learning curve for Zoom and Hangouts to be an effective tool for teams to work together was so steep. And so, as we think about like, okay, well, how do we effectively work together from home in a hybrid model or for teams that choose to do full remote work? I think a lot of it is actually also tied to like training. I think that some of the most helpful things early on for me and what we also provide in our sort of online communities is that professional development of like, how do you facilitate a good meeting online? And how do you use these tools to create, like meaningful conversations? And I think there is opportunity there. It's just a shift for so many of us. And I think we're getting there. And this is like, I've never been on this platform before that we're using on The Happening, but it's great. And more training on tools like this, I think is also going to be really helpful to more effectively work remotely and try to it's not going to be the same experience. It's just a different experience that has a lot of pros and some challenges to work through. And I think if we can, provide the right tools to employees and to teams to use these platforms well, I think that it can go a really long way.
I think one of the big questions that comes up is that of trust and kind of knowing who's on the other side, even if it's your colleague that you've worked with for years. We're seeing a different side of ourselves, even trying to navigate all of those pressures of home life and even connectivity. But to say nothing, and Naomi and Tracy, I'm sure you're doing this, Timur, I don't know about you, but the kind of arranging mentorships of accelerators and kind of the pairings that when it's a one-to-one, and even if it's a new relationship, to be able to do that virtually. And again, I'm a big, from what I'm hearing, it's not just virtual only. There will be, Timur, to your point, a return to some kind of physical interaction, but your neighbors, Timur, at BioSTL in the Cortex Innovation community, they're kind of doing staggered lab scheduling, and that's Cortex taking it on themselves to kind of play that facilitating role. So more have access to the labs, and it runs, like this global happening 24/7. So there's just something that there are lots of different shifts, and I don't know, to Naomi, your opening comment, like nobody's got a playbook on this, but accept that experiment and don't try to fix something, because it's not a one size fits all. I keep saying that, but it's just, everyone is going to need to access their teams and kind of participate on their own terms. And that even comes to being in person again. What does health and safety look like if you're running an in-person event? So, the personal aspect, Tracy, to get back to kind of this thread that we briefly talked about, is like supporting the little people, but supporting the local economy as well, to make sure that there is a physical infrastructure that can be sustained as we're kind of all more remote. And I'm going to go.
That's what we were talking about, where it's like I think, Pamela, you were saying it's, you learn so much now about like coworkers, or even in these types of conversations, you're zooming into people's homes and their kids are making cameo appearances. And in a way, it makes it all so much more human, right? There's not like a work person and your home person. It's all just is. I do want to touch really quickly on what Pamela was saying about, and Timur, you had mentioned this too, like, how we make it safe for people to come back to work. But this is something that, like CAC, we think so much about, because there is no replacing the in-person. And so as we think about, okay, what are the categories of why people aren't coming back right now? Well, number one is safety. Can you get to work safely, and can you work in an environment and collaborate with your team safely? And you had mentioned, Timur, there's the temperature checks, there's social distancing, there's mask wearing. Something that we're spending a lot of time focusing right now is on testing. If you can get assurance testing, where you're testing people who are asymptomatic a couple of times a week, so that that the people who you're interacting with are COVID negative. And that's just one aspect of a larger picture of safety mechanisms. That could then, that's another sort of level of just confidence in being able to work more safely. And then the other challenge of, how do you get people back to work is around childcare, and that's a whole different conversation. But I think that there's a number of barriers that we sort of have to think about and work through to get people to come in. But creating that, but there are ways that people are doing that now. And I think we're also, as we learn more about this pandemic, and as society and people respond sort of on an individual and societal level, I think the key is to make adjustments as you go, and to be very humble, very flexible, and get feedback, and really experiment to make sure that we can continue to support folks who again will eventually come in.
I think that's really interesting. If we think about it, it's really, the experimentation is about reimagining. So how are we thinking differently and breaking down barriers and norms? And hopefully at the end of the day, those are really helping to elevate issues that we kind of might not, as we were talking about walking past the tree, we might not have been thinking about previously, and taking those for granted, and actually now being very, very specific about bringing those forward. I'd love to explore a little bit this idea of technology, and how technology enables people to get into the office, or technology is enabling people to work from home more productively. So are there different tools that you and your organizations are utilizing and experiencing that you think are terrific and should share? Mm-hmm. Or help me understand a little bit about your thoughts on from a technological standpoint.
I'll share some thoughts that have come through with these kind of network sessions that we've been running through the Global Institute on Innovation Districts, more from the point of view about how some district leaders are connecting with their constituencies. And they're, again, this mantra of experimentation, but they're using a menu of tools. So the insights there are like for example, what to look out for. Some companies have banned Google Chat and Zoom, where other companies insist on WebEx as a format. So there's this kind of be prepared to navigate the tool inconsistencies, and that's one challenge. And then the second one that was kind of stand out was that there's never one tool. It's kind of a menu of tools that have to be fit depending on what the purpose is. So if it's a team meeting where, again, some people are meeting in person and some are dialing in, the video component, I mean, there are some people that, I'm really curious about you all, that like, even, you know, my board chair, we don't normally talk by video, and now it's just like, oh yeah, t-shirts, whatever, hey, how are you doing, you know, video check-ins, and I haven't yet seen the new tools come out, but it's just like these new kind of mashups of how to navigate this very strange environment we're in.
It's interesting, as you're, something that we've been focusing a lot on is, again, how do you support, like, how do you give people the tools to effectively, like, manage virtual and in-person meetings? And so as we think about the technology for that, I mean, like, think about I feel like it used to be where you would spend the first 10 or 15 minutes of the meeting just checking to make sure everything's working, trying to turn stuff on, like, oh, the camera's on, et cetera. So like, we have a really robust events program. And what the team has been focusing on, if we're not running events, is, well, how do we give people the tools to like put together a good event virtually? And for companies who are returning to the office, they're also going to have team members who are still going to be at home. So can we repurpose our conference rooms and our event centers to make sure that the experience feels really great, whether you're at home or in person? And so certain tools like, you know, the Owl meeting camera, right? It's like the 360 meeting camera that spins, is, so it's like
scary.
You know, yeah, I know. Very. I mean, all of these tools, right? But there are a number of, you know, I think that's where the technology is really interesting. I think it's being developed more and more, is, again, like, how do you sort of simulate as much as possible that in-person experience to make it not feel like, okay, there's a group in the room, there's a group at home. And then how do you make the learning curve, how do you speed, like, I guess, just, how do you make it easier for people to just quickly adapt to use video, and give them the lessons to do that?
So again, ladies, you all are killing it. So I'll come from a different angle, so we're just not on top of each other. You know, technology in two ways has done so much in the last 6 months. Like Naomi, you initially talked about just the learning curve, right? The gap of the learning curve has just been like closed tremendously. You know, I look at a lot of the religious organizations, right? You have churches and things of that nature. You know, there is a church specifically who's a client of mine, and I'm in technology. And I mean, the membership age range is from 40 to 65, right? And you could have said the word Zoom, and they may have thought that you were describing some type of sound effect or the speed of something, right? But now these senior citizens are using technology in a way that they've never used before, and they're now. I look at me being, you know, having two small ones. The grandparents are now able to see them daily from FaceTime, right? Or being able to have these different calls. So, you know, I think the advancement of technology has now allowed people to connect, right? So it kind of continues to keep pushing this narrative, this human narrative of like, technology has also allowed more people to have jobs, right? So Zoom has exceeded where it was. It's almost flew off the shelf, right? The stock on Zoom went up, right? The stock on different things went up, all because they're centered around now. There's this technology boom, right? Before it was kind of like optional, like if we want to do one, we'll allow people to be able to tune in. But now it's the must, like it's a mandatory. It's no longer optional. So I think that honestly, you know, technology has now given us this platform that we have now been able to do more things. And now I talk about that church. That church is now seeing a 60% in their growth, right? Now more people are able to come, and they're not limited. They don't have limited access to get out the house or the weather or something of that nature. Now everybody's tuning in, right? So again, I think it's really allowing people to be able to connect, but again, also making a market for anybody who wants to now come in from a technology
to build, if I may, Tracy, before we move on what Timur is saying, it has also painted, and I thought you were going to talk a little bit about this, Timur, just the stark disparities with the digital divide, because that's really, and especially in this field of innovation where technology is the driver, kind of everyone is being tested and pushed, every community, to be more resilient, be more thoughtful about your coworker, your neighbor, whomever is local to you. We're all in everybody's business about their health, with temperature checks. But this question of access and connectivity, I think, is one of the most central questions that I think those in the innovation community are dealing with, because I think the true innovators are trying to kind of take a step back and saying, okay, instead of going so far down this line or so far high up on the Uber technologies, not saying anything about Uber, but how do we actually build a broader base? And your example about church participation and not to mention the kind of community effects of that people get from any religious affiliation is just kind of like, that's the other part of the human element that comes through this big technology health crisis that we're in, because it is so central around the digital divide. And again, just one last breath on this, some of the questions that we've heard or challenges we've heard coming from innovation district leaders are, because of the stark differences and impacts that COVID is hitting those that are most vulnerable, not surprising, not just in service delivery and programs of startups trying to pivot to serve those needs, but also the districts themselves are saying, we can't operate in a bubble of our just who's in here now. We need to think of is particularly our adjacent communities where there are needs that are being unmet. It's just kind of like, it's an equalizer in a human terms.
Well, it's become so much more stark, actually.
Yeah.
I really am curious how folks are dealing with that. But it's.
I think that, a large part of the work that the Global Innovation District has studied is that a lot of these innovation districts are adjacent to universities on one side and areas that are very underserved, kind of on the other side. And when I'm in my office, in my physical office, I often use the analogy and put my arms out, looking at one direction. I've got University of Pennsylvania, which is one of the top universities in the US, and Drexel University are our neighbors on one side. And then on the other side is West Philadelphia. And we have about a 40% poverty rate in West Philadelphia. It's one of the highest poverty rates. And so one of the things that the Science Center was doing prior to the COVID crisis was very focused on how are we creating programs. We have a for the community. So making sure that we kind of are looking at both sides of our operations and not just thinking about how are we growing cell and gene therapy and life sciences, which is booming, but how are we really helping to serve the underserved population in the West Philadelphia community. And we were doing that through programs for middle and high school age children. We have a workforce development program that is looking to provide life-sustaining jobs to folks in the innovation district where we're located. For me, one of the critical things that I think has really been apparent about the companies that have been successful and have handled the crisis well, and ultimately would love your thoughts on how this plays going forward. But I do really think that it's because organizations and or people created trust, either with their employees or trust with their neighbors, that's helped them to shift and pivot. And so how do we create that trust if in fact we're not seeing each other on a day-to-day basis?
So real quick, let me say this, Tracy, and Pam, thank you so much for bringing that and opening that part of the conversation. So there are multiple municipalities here in St. Louis who have more than a 51% no access to internet in their home, right? So a lot of people, combat that and say, oh, well, you have your cell phone, right? But if you think about it, there's only so much that you can do on a cell phone, right? Like if you don't have access to searching the internet and pulling up tabs and doing good, quality research, you're even having to visit a library. And typically, if you don't have internet access, you probably don't have a computer, right? So there are so many people, like you said, unveiled. Like the veil has now been taken off because of again, I love the fact that we're communicating about the digital divide, because again, it's not just health that COVID is, exploiting right now. It's communicating everything that there are disparities in. So I truly believe that what should be, and right, some of the things that have started to happen is going to be, how do you have, and again, this gets back to those physical places. This pandemic is actually setting up so many communities for failure outside of health, right? Here in St. Louis, specifically where I'm located with our brick and mortar space, we're in a municipality called Florissant, Missouri, and all of the schools in the Hazelwood School District, which is right where we are now officially saying at least at minimum until October, no physical connection, and that students have a choice of whether they're going to go all virtual or whether they want to do like kind of in-person one-on-ones. The fact that it's even a choice, right, is now going to take those same places that have 51% no access, or 51% of those people in those communities have no access to internet. Like, what is that going to do to graduation rates? What is that going to do to retention? What is that going to do for those people who were laid off and that are now in those areas where there is no income because people have been laid off, right? Like now these students are going to have to become breadwinners. So again, like I think that, again, I can't say thank you enough for even bringing that to the forefront, because I'm sitting in the midst of that. I see so many students every day now just walking the block. And it's like, come in here, man. We have computers. Come in here. We have access to be able to learn and teach you this. And, now we've seen an influx of youth. My target market was 25 to 35. Our target market now is like 13 to 18, right? Because it's like we've had to fill the void that there's nobody who's filling it other than bars, clubs, and restaurants. Like that's the place that gives access, right? And even the libraries have minimal access now. So again, I think that that's huge, what you guys are saying. And I just want to make sure that I present that, to the forefront.
Absolutely. As today in Philadelphia, there was protests. We're the home to Comcast, and there was protest outside of the Comcast tower that they should be providing access to all of the children in Philadelphia, internet access. And despite the fact, and I was a Comcast employee for many years, but despite the fact that they have a program called Internet Essentials, which is a really reduced rate, the community was calling on them to say, do more. And so I think this will be a very continued pressing conversation as more and more schools are doing exactly what you're talking about, Timur. I think in Philadelphia, the students are not going back to in-person learning until at least November. It also gives pauses to say, okay, how can we in our innovation districts? I have a drop-in lounge that has free internet access. We've been slow to open because of city guidelines and social distancing measures. That being said, my teams measured the space, they set up the chairs, and we know we can accommodate 32 people. So that's 32 people that might have internet access that don't have it otherwise. And so how do we make sure that we're thinking creatively, we're experimenting, and we're seeing what we can do?
Yeah, Tracy, we're thinking in the same way too. I mean, you can imagine. So, I mean, fundamentally, CIC sells workspace, and where everyone's on 30-day terms. So we had a number of companies just say, we're not coming to work right now, so we're not going to use a space right now and give up their space. So we actually have a lot of space with great internet. And so it is thinking about, okay, how do we, as we think about how do we support a virtual learning environment? I mean, I think it's in a similar way of what you're thinking with the quorum space of, can we provide access, and how do we do that? And then how do you do that? The thing that I'm struggling with is how do you do that without supervision, and who's responsible? So it's complicated, but we have the resources there. It's just how do we connect them all? And I haven't figured that out yet.
I mean, I think that's that's brilliant, which is we have the resources and we have access to the resources. So it's incumbent upon us to be able to think about creative solutions and how do we bring the pieces in the communities together? And honestly, I think it's by getting great minds, in a place to help think about it. I want to make sure that if there are questions that the participants that folks have, please put them in chat. And I will keep asking questions if I don't see them otherwise. But one of them, which Susan Morris had put in, is talking about how people and children will handle groups. We've been in isolation or small groups for so long. So how are people going to assimilate? I would expand that by also saying, what are the things and or resources that companies or co-working spaces are going to need to do in order for people to come back to work? So I will, full transparency, you all have very young children. I am like the elder in the group, but what would, do they need to provide? Do organizations need to provide childcare? Do they need to provide health checks? What other amenities might become a necessity that we were not really able or previously thinking about before?
The two that you highlighted are exactly what we're thinking about. And it is around childcare and it's around health and creating a safer workspace. So I think those are absolutely critical. If we want to make sure that we're enabling everybody to come back to work, because otherwise we're going to leave people behind. So I think that is absolutely like what we need to think about. And in terms of, it's interesting, it's like sort of watching that chat thread and thinking about, how we handle groups and sort of coming out of our quarantine lives. It's interesting. I'm assuming that you're all also having this experience. If you are seeing people even outside, you're sort of setting like what the rules are. You're like laying the ground rules for every interaction. And I think that is actually going to be more and more common. And that's great that we're having a shared understanding of, okay, like here's what we're comfortable with and where people's limits are. And so I think that it's in a way you're setting the rules of the road for every meeting for your team to come back together, et cetera.
I think Pam stepped away. She is interacting with her little one as well. But, I think that, Naomi brings a great point, and again, I want to bring just a more unique viewpoint to the table. I'm sorry, not more unique, a different viewpoint to the table. And that being what I've learned, right, at now, this is during, right, this is during COVID, so we can't say post-COVID just yet, but now, there's a knack and there is also a love now as an entrepreneur, right? I'm not necessarily clocking in somebody else's location, but, I think I tell people all the time, like a lot of people say, I would love to be an entrepreneur. I say, well, I think you got to answer to more people when you're an entrepreneur than when you work somewhere, right? And I believe that now that I've had to, step into a place where entrepreneurship has continuously been my thing for the past 5 to 7 years, my time and my energy with my children has actually gotten better, right? So now I'm able to see those daily interactions because a lot of times, when you send your kids to school, excuse me, when your kids are sent to school, whether it's high school, right, at the point where they're of age to, speak for themselves and be able to, at least defend themselves, whether anything comes of harm. But when you send them off, they're with somebody else for 8 hours of the day. Right. And then even longer if they're doing other curricular activities. And you kind of don't know what the other half of their day looks like when you're not around. So now I'm seeing myself be able to be, even though mine are 1 and 3, my 3-year-old should be going to school this fall. Right. But now I'm sure that won't happen. So now it's, I've gotten the flashcards and, starting to build my own curriculums. But now I'm noticing, right, I'm even advancing what the typical curriculum would look like. So again, now using life experiences to enhance and evolve what a curriculum would be at a normal school. Because as I've sat in and I've watched these schools and I've looked at some of these students and how they're doing things, it's playtime for the most part versus true learning. And if you don't have, again, we get back to the conversation around access. If you don't have the access to put your child in a program that's going to help really propel, and it's not just daycare, then you now have an opportunity to set up the next generation in a way that, you know, other generations have not been prepared with. And it's not just television and cartoons, it's like educational learning shows now, right? And making those a priority, you know. So again, you know, if the big networks can, you know, and luckily, like, we're going to drop gems, we've been dropping gems all day. If these networks are going to be able to start having more educational content, they're going to see a boom in their bottom line. Because at this point, parents are going to be like, hey, look, my kid's been watching TV all day. Like, he or she can only watch so much Princess and the Frog, or, you know, whatever else on TV. So it's got to be something that's going to be able to be educational, and you're going to be able to be learning and creating knowledge in other areas, which is going to be amazing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I did have to step away because of childcare. And it's curious because I do think, and I'm curious, Naomi and Tracy, your experimentation with these new, like, the family dynamics of work. And, you know, there are some top employers or working environments where there are kind of childcare on site, or it's, I don't know, it's curious. Again, from a U.S. perspective, the healthcare crisis, the equity crisis, the, you know, the care economy crisis, because it's also elders that need care. Like, these are the barriers that prevent us from showing up to work sometimes anyway. So how can COVID, what are the examples of new models of not just one corporate environment? The other thing I was going to say that we've heard is around this disaggregation, and it's not all the eggs in one basket in one location, but, you know, people can show up, 2 people over here, 3 people over there, you know, 50 people over there. It's not, you know, and that there's an implication there. You know, as a longtime urbanist, I have questions about, like, what does that mean? Midtown Manhattan is just ghost town right now. What does that mean for drivers of economic growth? I don't know. I mean, I think you know, with all of these, I don't know, is, I guess the one thing that has to be underscored is that it's take that first step. And Timur, you said, I think before we got online, that you look at the tipping points to get things done. So, and that's happening in your church, you know, client that you had described in that community. It's really clear. It's like, what are those other examples? Because I think that's what everybody is hungry for right now.
I do think people see by doing or learning. So seeing examples of other folks who might be going to their church online all of a sudden opens up a paradigm. I was, when you said that example, Timur, I was thinking, in our church, they set up, cameras so they would web stream masses probably 2 or 3 years ago. I would venture to say, and I don't have any data behind this, but it was probably 5 people a week who were utilizing that. And so, but they had set it up, and so they had the technology, and now it's part of the mainstream because people are still concerned about what it looks like to go forward. So there's lots of chat in the chat. I don't know if you all have seen it, just about kind of, have you been tested lately? And so about going into group interactions. And so I think that is a really interesting thing to think about. We have just 3 minutes left. And then we'll shift over into the networking space so folks can continue kind of asking one-on-one questions of all of you. So in the last 3 minutes, I always like to do a lightning round. So I want to make sure that we have enough time left to do kind of a 1-word answer. And then maybe we'll have a chance just to give a little extent on what the 1 word means. So if you think about this time next year, what is the work environment going to look like? What's your 1 word that the work environment is going to look like? August 6th, 2021.
Humanistic.
Timur, do you have a 1 word?
Innovative.
And hybrid.
hybrid. I will
What's yours, Tracy?
kind of put my word out there, which is where we started, which is better. So I do think it will be better than it has been in many respects. Do you want to talk a little bit about humanistic? What you're thinking there?
There's fatigue that people are coming out of this kind of, so in a year, it's either going to be settled in and we're going to have some scars to share, and we're going to have a greater awareness of kind of the human value and that face-to-face interaction and even virtual. I think there's greater value placed on people, ironically, through this.
Mm-hmm. I think so too. Timur, innovative?
Yeah, just the expansion of creativity is going to start setting in physically now. So I think people are going to be doing things that they never imagined that they could do. And they're going to bring those to either the workplace or the co-work space or the concept spaces that exist and that are built outside of out of COVID-19.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly
Naomi?
what I was thinking, Timur. It's more of the way we do things is not going to be the same. It's going to have to be a mix. And I think it's going to, like, when I think about something that is a hybrid, right? It's taking what used to work just fine and some sort of like new innovation and putting them together, and it's better, it's more efficient. And it's going back to like the humanistic thing. It's more deliberate, right? It's that
and adaptive.
Exactly.
Humans are adaptive,
yeah.
So we're getting by.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Nima wrote transformative in chat. I think that is a great word. And I think it's a lot of the essence of what the conversation was, which was really very much focused on, while there's this place, how do we bring the human to the place and how are we being innovative about that so that at the end of the day, we don't just return to where we were, but we actually return to a better normal. Thank you all so much for your time. I know it is late where you are, and you have competing obligations for your time. So appreciate your sharing your thoughts with us. I think it's been incredibly informative.